My name is Marcus Fredland. I'm an SE at Exclusive Networks. We will continuously have these webinars, and we will focus from either vendor or for solutions from Exclusive Networks. So you will have those in your mails continuously as well. Any questions during the webinar, type them in the Q&A or in the chat, and we will take them in the end of the webinar. So today we would like to introduce Axonius, one of our new vendors, and they operate in a vector exclusive Sweden. They lacked coverage before the asset management vector. So today we will be listening to Annika and Nathan from Axonius, and I'll let them introduce themselves. So over to you.
All right, hey, thanks. Yeah, you first, go for it.
Sorry. Hi everybody, Annika Regis, Director of Channels for EMEA. I've been with Axonius for about 9 months now, and we're really excited to be doing this webinar with you and kind of forging our ways in the Nordics region. So good to meet you all.
All right, and my name is Nathan Burke. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Axonius. I've been here almost 4 years since before we've had a product. So I'm very excited to tell our story today and answer any questions that you have after the demo. So thanks for having us, and I guess we'll just jump right into it. Okay, this is what I thought we'd go over today. We'll keep it very simple. We're going to go over why asset management is still a challenge today in 2021 and the downstream implications for cybersecurity. We'll then talk about the problems that we solve at Axonius. We'll show how we do it. We'll show you in a demo, and we'll quickly touch on how our customers and partners are able to quantify value. And finally, we will leave plenty of time at the end for questions. So I encourage you, as Marcus said, to add questions in the questions functionality here and go to webinar. All right. So when we talk about the challenge that we solve here at Axonius, we often just sum it up with this one tweet. An organization's leader asks a simple question like, how many Windows hosts do I have? And depending on who they ask, they get a different number. And Annika, whenever I show this slide, I can almost hear heads nodding on the other side. The only pushback I ever get is that people say, wait a second, these numbers are too close together. Same with you?
Absolutely. It's such a common thing that people I get from customers, partners, you know, and it's especially partners that are kind of looking at the managed services. When they're going in and having those initial discussions, they're saying, so what do you have? And it's always a guesstimate as to, or an estimate when the customer is trying to describe what this managed service partner needs to kind of wrap their arms around for their infrastructure.
Yeah, and I think it is such a common thing. And one of the examples I heard just recently, I think it was this week, was someone was saying, could you, when you get a range like this, if you say how many devices do you have and you hear between 10 and 50,000, it's kind of like saying, how many children do you have between 1 and 4? It's just, you can't count on that kind of answer. But we see it all the time. And I guess the real question is why? Why is it still such a challenge in 2021? And I think with all the great tools we have, you think it should be easy, but when you look at it in context, it's pretty clear to see why this is still a challenge that's even getting worse. Because if you go back 20 years ago, right, you had Windows machines on physical networks, managed by Active Directory, protected by AV, and something to push out updates. Life was relatively easy, but then things changed. We started to see new kinds of devices. We started to see Macs and VMs, Linux boxes. So we bought different tools to manage and protect them. We then moved to mobile devices and we start adding more tools. And the whole time we're adding something not just for these different types of devices, but try to wrap our arms around the entire environment. We moved to the cloud. We introduced an entirely new set of solutions. And now that we're in the world of IoT and everything that can be connected is connected, and you start to look at that evolution and understand that the more devices and device types, the more solutions we implement, and they all know a piece of the puzzle, But all of these create different silos, and it makes it very, very difficult to ask what seem to be easy questions to get answers and then respond. So a couple of examples. Here's one that we see all of the time, which is my agent everywhere it should be? You have all of these different solutions that are agent-based, like EDR and configuration and patch management, and all of these other agent-based solutions deployed on endpoints. But how do you tell whether that agent is deployed and functioning as expected? And so in this example, let's say you're using CrowdStrike or Tanium or SCCM, whatever. How do you tell that it's fully deployed? I can't just go to that agent console and say, hey, can you tell me what devices that you're not installed on but should be? Instead, the only way I can get an answer to that question is by gathering data from the infrastructure and other sources to understand first the full scope of the environment, what's covered by that agent, and then which devices aren't covered but should be. So, Anika, I know that you're constantly talking with our partners and our customers in EMEA. Anything to add here?
I mean, this is exactly what we saw at Simpress. You know, we've just done a case study here, and the interesting thing that they came back with is before they installed the Axonius product, 40% of their devices that should have had EDR were not covered. And as soon as they installed Axonius, they were able to get that number up to 80%. You know, this is great news for our partners, it really is, because the reality is the value is not just felt just by Axonius. Actually, it's uncovering potential gaps in other technologies, and that could lead to potential upsells. So it's really, really valuable.
Yeah, and I think the other point too there is that even if it's something that they've already bought, and if they haven't deployed it, they're just not getting the value out of the solutions that they've already purchased. And if you're not getting value out of what you've already bought, the chances of renewing and actually getting what you paid for dramatically decrease. So I think this is just another way to show value for partners after the sale.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we see this kind of theme repeated in other use cases. And I'm sure we'll make sure that Nate covers those in the demo.
Sure. Here's another one, which is knowing about unmanaged devices on privileged networks. And again, just like the last one, the only way to answer that question is by collecting, correlating, deduplicating all of this data, and then being able to query across all of these sources to understand what's there, what should or shouldn't be there, and then being able to respond. And then one other example I'll give here that we see a lot is the idea of cloud-based VMs not being scanned for vulnerabilities, right? Well, we hear from customers that their VA scanners often have a hard time with the dynamic nature of the cloud, so they end up with cloud instances that aren't being discovered by their scanner, and they're missed during that scheduled scan window. And again, these are just a few specific examples, but the main idea here is that our customers find it increasingly difficult to answer questions like these when they need to get answers from multiple data sources that don't necessarily talk to one another.
Yeah, you know, so true. And it's funny because we know that there's a huge push to move to the cloud, and you know, the digital transformation, and actually that whole journey, it always starts with what do I have, what needs to go into the cloud, and also the tools that I'm using that were on-prem tools, are they going to continue working in the cloud? That's a big question that our customers are, or our prospects are, trying to answer.
Yep, great point. So to sum it up here, the way we see it is that all of these other tools are collectors. They can each provide detailed information about a subset of all of your infrastructure, but what's needed is an aggregator, something that can correlate the data from all of these sources, normalize it, and show the intersection of assets, of users, of software, of all of the security solutions in place. So that's our whole idea, and that's the premise of what we do. You've got all of this data. It's not a question of I'm missing the data. It's how do I use what I already have and make sense of it? So we think there are 6 questions we should be able to answer about every asset. The first is it known and managed? Where is it, both physically and on what network or subnet or segmented network? What is it? The difference between an IoT device, a laptop, whatever that is the core software up to date? What additional software is installed? And then finally, the bigger question that we're trying to answer is, does it adhere to my policy? If I'm able to answer all of these questions, I can then see how every other IT and security initiative gets easier.
Absolutely. I think it's another good example of questions that people are really struggling to ask and answer, you know, customers and our partners, when partners are trying to support our customer base. So
great. So we think what's needed, and this is what we do, is this new approach, a simple way to take advantage of all the tools, all the data that our customers already have to solve that asset management challenge for cybersecurity.
So yeah, you know, it is really, really, really important, you know. In fact, in July 2021, so very, very recently, Gartner has just coined the phrase. It's a bit of a mouthful, but we're going to attempt it. Cyber Asset Attack Surface Management, or
Nailed it.
CAASM. That's easier. And so, what is that really talking about? And it's a kind of a new area. It's all about the CAASM solutions, that they're focused on asset visibility and vulnerability challenges. And what we're doing is, by showing all assets through integrations with existing tools and letting customers query consolidated data to understand and address gaps. The exciting thing for partners is that this is a new area. You know, when we think about Gartner's quadrants and kind of areas within the security, they're all relatively crowded, kind of very mature. We are at the starting gates of this. So partners who kind of adopt during looking for opportunities in this area are really going to find that there's a reasonable amount of greenfield there. So it's very new, just July 2021. And, you know, according to Gartner, it's on a hyper cycle. It's on a really kind of hyper growth.
Yep. And
Agreed,
I
Nate?
think one thing that is just I think really unique, just that you hit on too, Anika, is how this relates to partners. Because if you look at other solutions on a Gartner hype cycle, you know, if you look all the way to the right and you're seeing network access control and tools like that. Now, those tools all solve a problem, but what's unique for partners with a CAASM solution like Axonius is that it also allows you to see all of the other tools that are installed, all of the other security solutions that are either being used or aren't being used. It allows you to see where there are gaps in infrastructure coverage. So this gives partners visibility that another type of solution that's just focused on end users wouldn't give you. So this is just something that is really unique for partners within the market.
Can I jump in and add something there, Nate?
Mm-hmm.
The reason why I get very excited about talking about Axonius is because we're changing the conversation. It's not we're not asking our partners now to go to a customer and say, well, you spent this amount of money on whatever the solution is. We want you to rip that out and replace it with us. We're not. That's never the conversation. The conversation takes a very holistic view. It says, we know you spent money in EDR. We know you spent money on firewalls. We know you spent money on your NAC solutions. We know you spent money on all of this. You've got your cloud, etc., etc. Let's have a look how we can enrich all of that money you have already spent, and let's see how we can enrich that. Let's see how we can help you to also get the data, but let's see how we can use what you have in the ground, Mr. Customer, and get more value out of the money you have already spent. That is such a nicer conversation that you're having with your customer, rather than, oh, could we have another $1 million PO for the same thing you bought, you know?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think one thing we also talked a lot about is the idea that the only thing that is inevitable is change. And we are constantly adding or changing different solutions. The EDR you had 5 years ago is probably different than what you have today. But what we're saying is, knowing that things are going to change, if you can get a full look at everything you have, if you're saying tomorrow I have an initiative to change my NAC solution, my whatever solution it is, if you can see everything you have and know exactly how everything relates to your security policy, you're able to then say, if I have this change initiative, that's fine. I can track it. I can understand how things are moving. I can understand that 30% of my devices still have the old thing installed. So I think it's making better use of what you already have, and then also being able to
It's like
be
future
ready for
proofing,
that
isn't
inevitable
it?
change. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
It's like future proofing.
All right, so here is the approach, and it's very simple. The idea is by connecting to all of the different sources that know about assets, Axonius gives customers really three things. First is that credible and comprehensive, always up-to-date asset inventory. Once you have that inventory, once you know what you have, Axonius then gives customers queries to understand where there are gaps. And a couple of those examples I gave before, show me anything that's not being covered by my EDR agent, or not being scanned by my vulnerability scanner, or you name it, anything to write a very simple query, and I'll show you here in the demo in a second, just to uncover these gaps. And then finally, Axonius has custom automated response actions to decide what to do anytime something deviates from your policy expectations. And I'll show that in the demo as well. As far as deployment goes, that's also very, very simple. Customers deploy as either a virtual appliance or as a service. So the platform is totally agentless. Instead, it just connects to all of these different solutions. There's over 350 of them using API connections that we call adapters. And because we don't need to install an agent, we also don't scan, we don't sniff traffic. Deployment is very, very fast. We'll show you exactly how in the demo, but this is what allows us to talk to a customer and get up and running very, very quickly, even if they have millions of devices. I mean, we have some where we have a POC running with like 10 or 12 million devices. It doesn't matter because we don't need that endpoint presence. And finally, these are just a few of the more common use cases that customers use the platform to address. So these are things from device discovery, so understanding unmanaged versus managed devices, ephemeral devices, endpoint management, so like I mentioned before, devices missing agents or devices with agents that are installed but aren't functioning, configuration management, so reconciling the data in a CMDB and then monitoring things that that fall out of the configuration expectations. And then on the incident response side, so understanding device context and coverage throughout the course of an investigation, and then being able to, imagine you're an incident responder, being able to pivot between an alert, a device, its state, the users, what's installed there. Vulnerability management is something we hear all of the time, both show me the devices that aren't being scanned, but also how do I prioritize what vulnerabilities to address by CVE or otherwise. And then things like GRC and audit, so meeting benchmarks and regulations and then satisfying audit requirements. All right, so with that said, let me pause and switch over to the demo.
Thanks, Nate. Well, while you're doing that, I think it's a good time just to remind you all to add any questions that have popped into your mind in the chat window or in the chat box, the Q&A, while Nate gets the demo back up.
All right, so are you seeing the demo environment?
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, so this is the Axonius dashboard. And actually, let me go full screen. There we go. All right, so if you were a customer just getting started with Axonius, the first thing you would do is go to our adapter screen. So these are all of the integrations that we were mentioning before. So we integrate with, I want to say it's like 380. Yeah, I don't have to guess. We can see here that there are 386 products that we integrate with out of the box. And these are everything from cloud infrastructure to NAC solutions, networking gear, you name it. I'm still on the A's here. But if you were just getting started today and you said, all right, I use AWS, you would go here, you would add connection, provide the credentials, and then decide in the settings how often to fetch, what to fetch. There's just a ton of options here. But you do that for all of the solutions that you're using. And so in this environment, we can see I've got 14 adapters connected. So AWS, we have Cisco for the networking gear. We have Forescout as a NAC solution. Our EDR is McAfee EPO, Active Directory, Azure. We have SCCM, Mobile Iron. We have our scanner as Tenable and VMware. So we are constantly adding more adapters based on what our customers use. And so every single release, I think we average like 9 or 10 new adapters. And once you've gone through and configured the system for all of the different sources that you use, the platform then immediately starts pulling back data on assets. And the first thing that customers see value in is right here. Because if you'll remember back to that first tweet slide, that question of how many devices do you have? It's such a difficult thing because you can only look at all the different sources and try to come up with an estimate. But what we do is we see, well, McAfee says that there's 34,000 devices and Tenable knows 29,000 and there's almost 3,000 AWS instances. So we can see here that although if we just add the total devices seen, that's like 200,000, we know through our unique device correlation that there are exactly 40,363 devices in this environment. And that's the first time a customer is able to answer that question. So immediately they're able to see value in knowing exactly what they have. And let's just look at one device. Let's see here. I'll just pick this one. Okay, so first we can see what all of these different sources know about this device. So this is what Cisco tells us. You know, it's a MAC address, an IP address. We get some very basic information there. Eclipsium tells us a little more, so it's a Windows 10 device. Forescout can give us some more information on ports and OS and also some installed software. EPO can tell us some more information here. Active Directory tells us what groups it's part of. It's this part of the demo.local domain. SCCM gives us more configuration options. We also see that it's a VM because VMware knows that it's a Windows 10 device that's actually a virtual machine. And so we get all of this information from each of those sources, but then this is where we aggregate it all together. So this is what we know about this one device. So we know all of this detailed information by normalizing all of the data from all of the sources. We can see all of this information, open ports, the network interfaces, all of the installed software, patch versions, agent versions, and hard drive. So we get all of this information about every device. So first we show you what you have. We've got that full list of all of the devices in the environment. Then we can look at the detailed view of each asset. So if you remember back to those three things we do, one is giving you that comprehensive, always up-to-date asset inventory. The next step is, how do I use queries to understand where I have gaps? And it's because we get all of this detailed information that we're able to do that. So if you'll remember back, the first question we asked was around agent coverage. I think it's called EPO in here. Let's see. Let's try this one. Okay. In this environment, McAfee EPO is our EDR agent. So let's say I want to answer this question. I want to know all of my Windows devices that are missing McAfee EPO. With a query that has 3 dropdowns, actually I can do it in 2. I can say, show me everything where the OS type equals Windows and does not have the McAfee EPO agent. Here we're saying, maybe that's too many. Maybe I just get this huge number. I only care about the ones that have been seen by something else in the last 30 days. And with those 3 dropdowns, I can run a query and I can see exactly how many Windows devices are missing that agent. And it's that simple. I can also look at not only those that are missing that agent, but have that agent installed, but the agent isn't working. And that's something that would be very, very difficult to do otherwise. Mostly if I went to EPO, I would say, where are you installed? And it's binary. But what I can do with Axonius, because I'm asking and getting information from multiple sources, I can say, show me every Windows device where the agent exists, but it hasn't transmitted any data back to the console in 7 days, but it's been seen by something else in the last, let's say, 3 days. So these are devices that have the agent installed, but it's either just not working, someone had admin rights and shut it down, but now all of these are devices that we would think are covered but aren't covered and are at risk. And that's something you can only do by getting information from multiple sources. One of the other examples we gave in the slides was unscanned. Let me see. Let's see here. 1 second. So here is AWS instances not being scanned by a VA scanner. This is the idea that we have our VA scanners that are really great at scanning anything that's on the network. But if we're now moving VMs to the cloud, how do we make sure that our tools that are looking at the network can find those VMs that are in cloud environments? So here in 2 dropdowns, we're saying, show me anything that's in AWS and not known to Tenable. And so now we're able to find all of these unscanned VMs with 2 dropdowns. Very, very, very simple. And then the last example we gave was around privileged networks. Let's see. Rogue devices on privileged networks. Now, what's interesting about this one is we have customers that are that have medical devices that are part of hospital systems or have network segmentations because they're a federal government agency, whatever that is, they need to have segmented and privileged networks. So for our example of, we have a prenatal genetics testing company, and they're saying, I have this one network and it's only Linux devices because they're imaging devices. If I ever see something that is a mobile device, that is a Windows device, that's a Mac on that network, I want the alarm bell to ring in the middle of the night because that shouldn't be here. And so based on whatever a customer expects to be there, we can create a query around rogue devices on privileged networks. And this is completely custom and unique based on what you care about and what should or shouldn't be there. But you can see here a query that is fairly complex, but it will show you anytime something that is considered a rogue device shows up on a privileged network and should not be there. So we talked about 2 things. First is getting the full asset inventory. The second is using queries to find out anytime there are gaps, anytime something doesn't fit your expectations. The third part is, well, what do you do about it? So in each of those examples, it's great to identify a problem, but that can often just be more work. What we're able to do now is decide exactly what custom response actions to trigger anytime something hits one of those queries. So here we can see what we do for enforcement sets. The idea is very simple. Based on any saved query, you decide what to do. These are things like notify. So the most basic action. I can send an email, I can send a syslog, I can send a webhook to another system, a Slack message. So these are just basic notification actions. Hey, I found this device, do something about it. We can then create an incident in a ticketing system like ServiceNow or Jira. We can tag or add custom data right within Axonius. We can enrich device or user data from a third party. So we can enrich device data from Shodan. We can, here's another example I really like. So let's say that I find a user that's been involved in a breach, or I find something that the user that has the wrong privileges. I can then say, has this user been involved in a public breach that is in Have I Been Pwned? Right, so we can use that third-party data to enrich what I found through all of the other data sources. I can manage CMDB assets. So I can, if I find a new device and then it's not in like ServiceNow or any other CMDB, I can create that asset in the CMDB. Or if I find that an asset has changed and that change is not up to date in ServiceNow or other CMDBs, I can update it. I can update vulnerability assessment scanner coverage. So in that example where we find a cloud-based VM that is not known to my VA scanner, well, add it to the next scheduled scan. Easy. I can deploy files and run commands. So if I find something that's missing that EPO agent, I can install it. I can use an endpoint security agent to do something like isolate or unisolate or initiate a scan. Also install an update. I can manage AD services to enable or disable users or devices. I can do the same with AWS services, Azure services, and DNS services. So that's really that third part, is let me decide what I want to do anytime something deviates from my expectations. Now, a couple of other things I want to touch on briefly is we talked mostly about devices here in the demo, but we're also grabbing user information as well. And just like we can do for devices and for cloud instances, we can center queries and actions around users. If you look here, very much like we do with devices, you can see all of the different users in this environment. And we have some queries here. So here's one with, show me all of my admin users last seen in the domain in 30 days and their account isn't disabled. Here's one with admins that haven't changed their password in 180 days. And this allows you to really pivot between, in that incident response use case, going between a device and a user to understand what happened during an incident and to be able to follow that investigation all the way through. I'll give an example there. This is the default dashboard, but you can also create dashboards for anything you want. And we have several customers that have their IT infrastructure team that has a different dashboard. Here's a good example of just this. This is my asset summary. Show me the breakdown between Windows servers, workstations, Linux servers, you name it, and just looking at the distribution and coverage, or security issues. So here's a great example. Here are all of my devices that have a critical CVE. Let's just take a look at one. So here's a device that I can see has vulnerable software, and I can see the CVE ID and severity. So I can see that this device has 4 critical CVEs. I can also just look at that CVE. How do I get back there? 1 second. When I go full screen, it doesn't let me do that. Hold on. There we go. Great. So I can look at those CVEs, but then I can also start going between the installed software, what's vulnerable, what was protecting it, what's missing. And so it's that full scope between a device, what's on it, vulnerable software, users, and being able to run that full incident investigation with all of the information I need right from the very beginning without having to log into multiple systems and look at all conflicting data. The last thing I'll show here before we go back and finish up with slides and then go to your questions is what we do for cloud asset compliance. The idea here is, since we're already connecting to public cloud infrastructure like AWS, Google Cloud Platform, Microsoft Azure, and Oracle Cloud, the CIS has benchmarks and best practices for security for each of those cloud infrastructure providers. So for instance, there are 43 scored rules in the CIS Amazon Web Services benchmark. What we can do is we can look at all of the different rules between IAM, logging, monitoring, etc., and show me any of my AWS instances that fail any of these rules. So I'll just pick one of them. Ensure hardware MFA is enabled for the root account. So we can see for any of these rules, we see the rule, the category, we can see the description of the rule, remediation actions, and we can see all of the devices are actually cloud instances that have failed these rules. And so we do that with these different cloud providers. So you can see anytime any of your public cloud infrastructure assets fail any of these scored rules. Anything else I should cover here on the demo, Anika, or do you think we got most of it?
I think we got it.
Okay, so then
Thanks,
I
Lee.
will get back to whoa. Hang on.
We're seeing your presenter window.
Yeah, it's acting up on me. Hang on one second. There. Okay. All right. So the last thing I'll show here is something that I think is fairly unique about us. Is one thing that's difficult in cybersecurity is quantifying value, right? If you're selling an EDR product, what is the value of a breach not happening? It's just not very straightforward. It's difficult to quantify. But what's interesting about what we do with customers, and we do this on every POC, is we're able to run through just very basic information on, tell me, how many full-time staff members you have, and the IR analyst salary, how much time are they spending on things like getting an inventory and preparing for an audit. And then what we can very simply do is, based on how we can reduce the time spent on some of these things, we can very quickly show the benefits and show exactly how quickly they're able to prove value using Axonius, based on how much time they're able to save, what else they're able to do instead. And this is something we run through with every customer. So we're able to really understand all of the use cases, all of the things they care about, and we can easily quantify the value before they even get to the POC. We can run through this, and then once they do the POC, it's very easy to say, all right, this is exactly the value I expect. This is the time frame. I'm going to be able to realize the benefits of my investment. So just something fairly unique about us, that we're able to put a number on how much time, and then the associated dollar figure that they'll be able to save using Axonius. All right, so that said, let's open it up for questions.
Thanks, Nate.
Any questions from anyone? Well, there are no questions, so I guess you guys did an excellent job explaining what Axonius can help us with regarding the assets we have on our networks. So if there are no questions, well, thanks a lot, Nathan and Annika, for great demo and presentation. And I want to thank everyone. Yeah, and I want to thank everyone for participating today and listening to our new vendor, Axonius. So if you need anything, then please feel free to contact either me or your contact at Exclusive Networks. So have a nice evening. And again, thanks to everyone.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.